You are now listening to Mark's Unexplained World by Mark the Medium, available on Apple Podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Prime, Podbean, and most other podcast platforms. Tonight's episode is about the dark story behind Janis Joplin. So it's over to you now, Mark, for this week's musical interlude.
Janis Joplin was an American singer and songwriter from the mid to late 1960s who is probably best known as one of the most iconic and successful rock performers of her era. She was mainly noted for both her powerful mezzo-soprano vocals along with her electric stage presence. In 1967, following an appearance at the Monterey Pop Festival, where she was the lead singer of the psychedelic rock band Big Brother and the Holding Company, she very quickly rose to prominence, and after releasing 2 albums with the band, she left Big Brother to continue as a solo artist with her own backing groups. As well as the Monterey Pop Festival, she also performed at the 1969 Woodstock Festival, and then in the early 1970s she went on to perform with the Festival Express train tour. Her most popular songs included her cover versions of Emma Franklin's Piece of My Heart, Garnet Mims and the Enchanters' Cry Baby, and George Gershwin's Summertime, as well as one of her own original songs, which was her final recording, called Mercedes-Benz. However, after releasing 3 albums, 2 with Big Brother and the Holding Company and 1 solo album, on the Sunday evening of the 4th of October in 1970, at the tender age of just 27, Janis Joplin sadly died of a heroin overdose. She was found dead on the floor of her room at the Landmark Motor Hotel by her road manager and close friend John Byrne Cooke. Her death was ruled accidental. Greetings, Unexplainers. Thank you once again for tuning in and listening to this psychedelic rock episode of Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I'm a medium, a ufologist, a true crime buff, and a man who is very dark and disturbed when it comes to humour. In fact, he is pretty much dark and disturbed to anything. But just to give you a better idea of who I am and what I do, every week, usually on a Tuesday evening, allowing for bank holidays and busy weekends, I do a podcast on the many wide and various subjects that fall under the Unexplained banner. These include ufology, hauntings, disasters, and all sorts of other paranormal phenomena, including true crime, unsolved crime, serial killers, and the occasional missing person who often disappears under the strangest of circumstances. So if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review or an opinion of this subject episode that I can reply to, a thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel. Or if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about this sad tale surrounding the dark story behind Janis Joplin. And this week's necessary disclaimer. This story is a tale that involves drug use, suicide, and death through misadventure, so may prove upsetting to some. Also, I have had to change a couple of quotes very slightly because YouTube gets really upset and throws its toys around with certain words and phrases, so you listen at your own discretion. However, as usual, all opinions and comments are strictly my own, but the facts of the case remain. I also apologise if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My English, although it is my first and only language, I only just found out the other day that if you put a copy of Macbeth on the top of a dictionary, you get a play on words. But anyway, let's get back to the story. Janis Lyn Joplin was born in Port Arthur, Texas, on the 19th of January in 1943 to Dorothy Bonita East, who was a registrar at a business college, and her husband Seth Ward Joplin, who was who was an engineer at Texaco. My apologies. And she was also the eldest sister of two younger siblings named Laura and Michael Joplin, with the family being regular attendees of the First Christian Church of Port Arthur, which was a church belonging to the Christian Church or Disciples of Christ denomination. From a very young age, Janis Joplin's parents felt that she needed more attention than their other two children, and as a teenager she befriended a group of outcasts, one of whom had albums by blues artists such as Bessie Smith, Ma Rainey and Lead Belly, which Janis later credited as having a major influence on her decision to become a singer. So, taking this musical influence on board, Janis began singing blues and folk music with friends at the Thomas Jefferson High School at Port Arthur in Texas. Janis Joplin, in later interviews, stated that while at high school she was often ostracised and bullied, and as a teenager she became not only overweight, but she also suffered from severe acne, which left her with deep scars that required dermabrasion. On an interesting side note, dermabrasion is a type of surgical skin planning with the general goal of removing acne, scarring and other skin or tissue irregularities. It is typically performed in a professional medical setting by a dermatologist or plastic surgeon who is trained specifically in this procedure. Dermabrasion has been practiced for many years, even before the advent of lasers, and involves the controlled deeper abrasion or wearing away of the upper to mid layers of the skin with any variety of strong abrasive devices, which include a wire brush, diamond, wheel or phrase, sterilised sandpaper, salt crystals or other mechanical means. Dermabrasion procedures are surgical invasive procedures that typically require a local anaesthetic and are often performed in surgical suites or in professional medical centres. Other kids at high school would routinely taunt and tease Janis Joplin by calling her names like pig, freak, Negro lover and creep. She later reported, again in an interview, that, and I quote,
"I was a misfit. I read, I painted, I thought. I didn't hate Negroes."
In 1960, Janis Joplin graduated from high school and attended the Lamar State College of Technology in Beaumont, Texas. And during the summer, she later attended the University of Texas at Austin, although she did not complete her college studies. The campus newspaper, called the Daily Texan, ran a profile on her in the issue dated on the 27th of July in 1962, with the headline saying, and I quote,
"She dares to be different.
The article began, and again I quote,
She goes barefooted when she feels like it, wears Levi's to class because they're more comfortable, and carries her auto harp with her everywhere she goes, so that in case she gets the urge to break into song, it will be handy. Her name is Janis Joplin."
During the summer, while at the University of Texas in Austin, Janis would perform with a local folk trio called the Waller Creek Boys, showcasing her strong mezzo-soprano vocals and frequently socialising with the staff of the campus humour magazine called The Texas Ranger. And another very quick but interesting side note, the Texas Ranger was the undergraduate humour publication by the University of Texas in Austin, which was succeeded in 1997 by the Texas Travesty. Over the years, the Texas Ranger often drew its anger and resentment at the University of Texas administration for its targeted satire and occasional risky content. Staff members who worked for the Texas Rangers publication would often call themselves the Rangeroos and were known for their unofficial privately funded parties, especially in the 1960s. Janis Joplin cultivated, and at the same time nurtured, a kind of rebellious manner by styling herself partly after her favourite female blues heroines. She recorded her first song called What Good Can Drinking Do on tape in the December of 1962 at the home of a fellow Texas University student. Then, after a time, in the January of 1963, she decided to leave Texas, saying, and I quote,
"Just to get away."
Adding, and again I quote,
"Because my head was in a much different place."
After this first short break, in part 2, we will look at Janis Joplin's run-ins with the law, the consequences of her early drug use, and her breakthrough into the music business.
This show is brought to you courtesy of Neil Packer and the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre. Find them online at www.hauntedresearchcentre.com or at 9 to 11 Regent Street, Hinckley, LE10 1AW. Open on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for guided tours of the haunted rooms at just £3 per person. Booking is essential at all times, and over 16s only, please, unless accompanied by an adult. The haunted rooms are extremely haunted, and paranormal activity could and has taken place at any time. Some areas and particular objects or items can be quite scary and unnerving. Membership is available for £25 to qualify for selective offers. And why not download the app, available on both iOS and Android, for only $3.99, to keep up to date with what is coming up at the centre.
In 1963, Janis Joplin was arrested in San Francisco for shoplifting, and during the years that followed, her drug use increased. In fact, her drug use was so bad, she acquired not only a reputation as a speed freak, but she also became known for her occasional use of heroin. But her drug use didn't just stop there. Oh no. She was also known to spend her time, and money as well of course, using other psychoactive drugs, along with being a heavy drinker throughout her musical career, with her favourite beverages being an American naturally fruit-flavoured whiskey liqueur called Southern Comfort. On an interesting side note, a psychoactive drug, or otherwise known as a psychopharmaceutical, is a mind-altering drug or conscious-altering drug with a chemical substance that changes the brain function and results in alterations in perception, mood, consciousness, cognition and or behaviour. Physicians and other healthcare practitioners prescribe psychoactive drugs from several categories for therapeutic purposes. These include anaesthetics, analgesics, anticonvulsants and anti-Parkinsonian drugs, as well as medications used to treat neuropsychiatric disorders such as antidepressants, anxiolytics, antipsychotics and stimulants. Some psychoactive substances may be used in detoxification and rehabilitation programs for persons dependent on and addicted to other psychoactive drugs. In the May of 1965, Janis Joplin's friends in San Francisco, noticing the detrimental effect on her from her regularly injecting methamphetamines, described her as looking both skeletal and emaciated, so they managed to persuade her to return back to her home and family in Port Arthur, Texas. During that month before going back to her family, all her friends threw her what's known as a bus fare party in order to help raise funds so she could return to her parents. 5 years later, during an interview with the Rolling Stone magazine, Janis Joplin told the writer and journalist David Dalton of her first spell in San Francisco, saying that, and I quote,
"I didn't have many friends, and I didn't like the ones I had."
It's now the spring of 1965, and Janis has moved back in with her parents in Port Arthur, which, as I'm sure you will agree, it's not a good career move. But after her parents noticed her weight of just 88 pounds or 40 kilos, she drastically changed her lifestyle. She avoided drugs, alcohol, and adopted a beehive hairdo, which obviously wouldn't have made her put on weight, but it would have certainly given her some extra height. She also enrolled as an anthropology major at Lamar University in nearby Beaumont in Texas. A very quick side note here, just in case you didn't know or weren't too sure, anthropology is the scientific study of humanity concerning human behaviour, human biology, cultures, societies, linguistics, in both the present and the past. During Janis's time at Lamar University, she commuted to Austin to sing solo whilst accompanying herself on the acoustic guitar, with one of her performances being a benefit gig by the local musicians for the Texas blues singer, guitarist and songster Mance Lipscomb, who was suffering with ill health. During the years of 1965 and 66, Janis Joplin would commute from her family Port Arthur home to Beaumont, also in Texas, where she would have regular counselling sessions with a psychiatric social worker named Bernard Garatano at a counselling agency that was funded by the non-profit organisation United Fund, which today is known as the United Way. In a later interview by the biographer Myra Friedman, after Janis Joplin's death, her psychiatrist Bernard Garatano said that Joplin had been baffled by how she could pursue a professional career as a singer without relapsing into drugs, and that her drug-related memories from immediately prior to returning to her parents' home in Port Arthur continued to frighten her. By all accounts, Janis Joplin would sometimes bring along her acoustic guitar to her counselling sessions with Bernard Garatano, which, of course, meant that other people in other offices within the building would often hear her singing. She also said that during her sessions, if she were to avoid being a professional singer, she would have to become a key punch operator or a secretary, and then a wife and a mother, just like all the other women in Port Arthur. One of the things that her psychiatrist, Bernard Garatano, told her, whilst making a very valid point, was that she did not have to use any narcotics in order to succeed in the music business. In 1966, Janis Joplin's bluesy vocal style attracted the attention of the San Francisco-based psychedelic rock band Big Brother and the Holding Company, which had already gained some considerable fame amongst the emerging hippie community in Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco. At that time, she gave her parents the impression that Austin in Texas, where she was performing with her acoustic guitar, was her final destination, and that it was at the same location as the rock band she was going to join, meaning Big Brother, of course. So on the 4th of June in 1966, Janis Joplin officially joined Big Brother and the Holding Company, with her first public performance with them at the Avalon Ballroom in San Francisco. And it was soon after that performance she informed her parents by post that she wasn't in Austin, Texas at all, but she was in fact in San Francisco. So don't forget to wear some flowers in your hair. Sorry, I just couldn't resist that one, but it could have been worse. I could have sung it to you instead. But anyway, I digress, as usual. Janis Joplin was still very strict about the use of drugs, and in the June of 1966, when she shared an apartment with music promoter Travis Rivers upon their arrival in San Francisco, she made him promise that using needles would not be allowed. However, when fellow Big Brother bandmate Dave Getz accompanied her from a rehearsal to her home, Travis Rivers was not there, but, according to Dave Getz's recollection 25 years later, and I quote, two or three guests whom Rivers had invited were in the process of injecting drugs. One of them was just about to tie off. Dave Getz also recalled, and again I quote, Janis went nuts. I'd never seen anybody explode like that. She was screaming and crying, and Travis walked in. She screamed at him.
We had a pact. You promised me. There wouldn't be any of that in front of me.
I was over my head. I tried to calm her down. I said, they're just doing mescaline because that's what I thought it was, she said.
You don't understand. I can't see that. I just can't stand to see that.
The band's self-titled debut studio album, simply called Big Brother and the Holding Company, was released by Mainstream Records in the August of 1967, shortly after the group's breakthrough and mammoth appearance in June earlier that same year at the Monterey Pop Festival. After this second short break, in part 3, we will look at Janis Joplin's split from Big Brother, her solo career, her final hours, and her legacy.
Fright Nights was established in 1999 as the first company in the world to offer overnight ghost hunt experiences to the general public, pioneering paranormal events since the last century. Fright Nights operate at hundreds of the UK's most haunted and exclusive venues. All events have their own team of experienced paranormal investigators, mediums and psychics. They have a VIP members club for regular returning guests, offering loyalty discounts and exclusive invitation-only events. They can also host private events for your family and friends. You can contact them on 07 852 998 628 or email them at office@frightnights.co.uk, or take a look at their website at www.frightnights.co.uk, where you can see the many locations they investigate and learn about them and the opportunities they have available. Hundreds of ghost hunters join Fright Nights every month for the most thrilling ghost hunting experiences they'll never forget. If you haven't been on a ghost hunt before, then why not join them to see what it's all about? Why not visit their social media sites for up-to-date information on all the places they visit and to see what's coming up in the future? They look forward to seeing you all soon. Fright Nights Ghost Hunting Events. Remember, only the original will do.
In 1968, after Janis Joplin split from Big Brother and the Holding Company, she then formed a new backup group called the Cosmic Blues Band, which was mainly composed of session musicians, with this new group's influence being the soul bands of the 1960s. But unfortunately, by early 1969, Janis was allegedly shooting at least $200 worth of heroin per day, which in 2024 is the equivalent to $1,715 per day. Although efforts were made to keep her clean during the recording of her first solo album, called I Got Them Old Cosmic Blues Again Mama, Gabriel Meckler, who was producing the album, did his best to keep her away from both her drugs and her drug-using friends during the record's production. On the Sunday of the 17th of August in 1969, Janis Joplin performed at Woodstock. She had informed her backing group, the Cosmic Blues Band, that they would be performing at the concert as if it were just another gig. She was flown there by helicopter with a pregnant Joan Baez and Baez's mother to the festival site, and according to Joan Baez, Janis was very eager to get on stage. However, she became very nervous when she saw the size of the festival crowd. Janis's performance was also, due to contractual obligations from the other bands, repeatedly delayed. In fact, she had to wait a full 10 hours before she could go on stage. So, being faced with this 10-hour delay, she spent some of that time shooting heroin and drinking alcohol. However, being the professional that she was, she managed to pull through with a full set on stage and engage frequently with the crowd, asking them if they had everything they needed and if they were staying stoned. Pete Townsend, who performed with The Who later that same morning after Janis Joplin had finished, witnessed her performance and said in his 2012 memoir, and I quote, "She'd been amazing at Monterey, but tonight she wasn't at her best, due probably to the long delays and probably to the amount of booze and heroin she consumed while she waited. But even Janis on an off night was incredible." However, Janis was unhappy with her performance at Woodstock, and her singing was not included, by her own insistence, in the 1970 documentary film or the soundtrack for Woodstock, music from the original soundtrack and more, although the 25th anniversary director's cut of Woodstock includes her performance of the tracks Work Me and Lord. On the 11th of September in 1969, Janis Joplin released her first solo album called I Got Them Old Cosmic Blues Again Mama. The album was poorly reviewed on its initial release, due mainly in part to its shift towards soul and R&B and away from the hard rock and psychedelic sound that brought her to fame with Big Brother and the Holding Company. One music critic, a Mr. John Burks of the Rolling Stone magazine, wrote in a November 1969 issue praising Joplin's vocal performance. However, he notes that her vocals are hindered by her backup band's instrumental role in the album. Over the decades, opinions of the album have warmed somewhat, and that taken on its own merit, the album has its strengths, but it has been nonetheless described as a flawed effort, due in part to the backing musicians sounding a little stiff. On the 11th of July in 1970, Janis Joplin made a revealing statement about her sexuality to her good friend Richard Hungdon, who was the San Francisco-based road manager for the rock band The Grateful Dead. I don't know what's wrong with me today, and whom she had known since 1966. One night, when both Joplin and Hungdon were off stage during a San Diego gig, she turned to him and said, and I quote,
"I hear a rumour that somebody in San Francisco is spreading stories that I'm a dyke. You go back there and find out who it is and tell them that Janis says she's gotten it on with a couple of thousand cats in her life and a few hundred chicks and see what they can do with that."
On the 2nd of May in 1999, a reporter named Kim France, in a New York Times article called Nothing Left to Lose, wrote of Janis Joplin that, and I quote,
"Once she became famous, Joplin cursed like a truck driver, did not believe in wearing undergarments, was rarely seen without her bottle of Southern Comfort, and delighted in playing the role of sexual predator."
Janis Joplin's overall image consisted of a small tattooed heart on her left breast, which marked an early moment in the popular culture's acceptance of tattoos as art, and another of her trademarks was her flamboyant hairstyles, which often included coloured streaks and accessories such as scarves, beads and or feathers. On the Sunday evening of the 4th of October in 1970, Janis Joplin was found dead on the floor of her apartment, room number 105, at the Landmark Motor Hotel located in Hollywood by her road manager and close friend John Byrne Cooke. And although alcohol was present in her room, newspapers reported that no other drugs or paraphernalia were present. A Los Angeles County coroner named Thomas Noguchi performed an autopsy on Janis Joplin and determined the cause of death to be a heroin overdose that was possibly compounded by alcohol. But curiously enough, and according to a 1983 book authored by Joseph DeMona and again by the coroner Thomas Noguchi, the evidence of narcotics was removed from the scene by a friend of Janis's and then later put back after that person, whoever they may have been, realised that an autopsy was going to reveal that narcotics were indeed in her system. The American author and musician John Byrne Cooke believed Janis had obtained heroin that was much more potent than what she and other LA heroin users had received on previous occasions. Her death was ruled as accidental. A close friend of Janis's, called Peggy Caserta, has insisted that Joplin's death was not an accidental overdose, but rather a result of a head gash suffered after the hourglass heel of her slingback sandal got caught in the shag pile carpet, thus causing her to lose her balance. However, Peggy Caserta did concede that drugs and or alcohol may have indeed played a role in hastening her death that night. Janis Joplin's death, in the October of 1970, at just 27 years old, stunned her fans and shocked the music world. Music historian Tom Moon wrote that Joplin had, and I quote, "a devastatingly original voice." And music columnist John Pareles of the New York Times wrote that Joplin as an artist was, and I quote, "overpowering and deeply vulnerable," with the author Megan Terry also saying that Janis Joplin was, and I quote,
"the female version of Elvis Presley in her ability to captivate an audience."
Janis Joplin's most popular songs included her cover versions of Emma Franklin's Piece of My Heart, Garnet Mimms and the Enchanters' Crybaby, and George Gershwin's Summertime, as well as her own original song, which was her final recording, called Mercedes-Benz. On the 11th of January in 1971, Columbia Records released Janis Joplin's second solo album titled Pearl. The album was released 3 months after Janis Joplin's death and was the final album with Joplin's direct participation and her only album recorded with the Full Tilt Boogie Band, which was her final touring unit. It peaked at number 1 on the Billboard 200 and held that spot for 9 weeks. Pearl ended up being certified quadruple platinum by the Recording Industry Association of America, and it was ranked number 259 on Rolling Stone magazine's 2020 list of the 500 greatest albums of all time, with it also being inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. On the 19th of January in 1988, on what would have been Janis Joplin's 45th birthday, the Janis Joplin Memorial, which was sculptured by Douglas Clark and made with original gold, was dedicated to her during a ceremony in Port Arthur, Texas. In 1995, Janis Joplin was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and in 2005 she received a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. In the November of 2009, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Museum honoured her as part of its annual American Music Masters series, and amongst the artefacts at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Museum exhibition are Janis Joplin's scarf and necklaces, her psychedelically painted 1965 Porsche 356 Chevrolet, and a sheet of LSD blotting paper designed by Robert Crumb, who was the designer of the Big Brother and the Holding Company cover album Cheap Thrills. Fast forward a few years, and after many more awards and accolades, in 2023 the Rolling Stone music magazine ranked Janis Joplin at number 78 on its list of the 200 greatest singers of all time, and also in 2023 the National Public Radio, or NPR for short, dubbed Janis as the Queen of Rock and named her as one of the 50 greatest voices. Janis Joplin was cremated at the Pierce Brothers Westwood Village Memorial Park and Mortuary in Los Angeles, and her ashes were scattered from a plane into the Pacific Ocean. But as of 2013, she still remains as one of the top-selling vocalists in the United States, with the Recording Industry Association of America, or the RIAA for short, showing certifications of 18.5 million albums sold, with her still today having a profound influence on many singers. Singer and songwriter Alicia Beth Moore, otherwise better known by her brand name of Pink, said this of Janis Joplin, and I quote,
"She was so inspiring by singing blues music when it wasn't culturally acceptable for white women, and she wore her heart on her sleeve."
Pink also said of Janis that she was, and again I quote,
"A woman who inspired me when everyone else didn't."
There is a lot of resources regarding the life and times of Janis Joplin, which include her ups, her downs, and her struggles both as an artist and as a woman in the rock business of that time. But out of everything I read and researched about her, there was one quote she made that to me summed up how she was feeling about herself, even after she put the happiness of her fans and her fellow musicians first. And I quote,
"On stage, I make love to 25,000 people, and then I go home alone."
I did think of ending this podcast with one of Janis's songs, but unfortunately due to copyright constraints, I can't. However, I can highly recommend listening to her music, either perhaps Big Brother's Cheap Thrills or her second solo album Pearl, or to be honest, any of her other works. They're all pretty good.
Thank you all for taking the time out to listen to this episode of Mark's Unexplained World. In our next episode, show number 145, we are going to be looking at what happened to Jeanette De Palma. Jeanette De Palma was an American teenager who is believed to have been murdered sometime on or around the 7th of August back in 1972 in Springfield Township, Union County, New Jersey, United States. Her body was discovered the following month on a cliff, known to locals as the Devil's Teeth, located in Springfield's Hoodale Quarry. The events of her death were subject to sensationalist coverage in local media for rumoured connections to alleged occult activity in the area.
This show was written and researched by myself, Mark Hughes, and proofread and edited by Linda Hughes. As usual, the pronunciations of all the names and places was all mine. The actors in this episode were Mark Hughes, Linda Hughes and Denise Pooler, with special thanks to Neil Packer and the staff at the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley. And of course a big thank you to everyone for listening. We never run out of ideas here at the office for Mark's Unexplained World podcast. But if you know of any other intriguing stories under the Unexplained banner, including ufology, hauntings, disasters, and any other sort of paranormal phenomena, as well as true crime, unsolved crime and missing people, just drop me a direct message and I'll see what I can do. I'll also include the name of the person who suggested the idea in the end credits of the podcast, if they're happy for me to do so, of course. And again, just to add, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, give us a like and a follow. I thank you in advance. Mark's Unexplained World, because there's more to the paranormal than meets the third eye. And remember guys, keep it real, because being real is better than being perfect. This show and all its contents are covered by basic copyright of Mark the Medium.